Okay, it says we're live, so welcome everyone to episode number 97 of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Bolland, and today we have a returning guest, a very good personal friend of mine, Craig Foster. So, Craig, thanks for coming on again to this podcast episode, and also happy St. Patrick's Day. You're wearing green,
Happy
and I'm
St.
wearing my
Patrick's Day.
desert, and I'm wearing my
Yes.
desert flag t-shirt. So,
I love it.
thank you. There's actually a huge desert flag on the back as well, so it's
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. I'm going to have to find that and get one.
yeah.
That's
Uh,
great.
there's like a company called the Nauvoo Legion Company or something like that does t-shirts. So if you were to Google it
Okay.
afterwards, yeah.
All
But
right.
yeah, today we will be discussing Craig's book, which was based on his master's thesis entitled Tracts and Polemics, a critical analysis of anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain, 1837 to 1860. It was initially a master's thesis and was published by Greg Kofford Books back in 2002. And I thought this would be like a very good episode because one, I think this was the very first book of yours I read even before we met in person. I mean,
Yes.
we've actually known each. I think I knew about you for like a few years, but I don't think we actually became friends until like I joined the Fair email list back in January of 2008. You were excited that someone from Ireland was actually on the list.
Yes.
And
Yes, it was.
yeah, and we actually have met like in person in Ireland a couple of times. We also, when I lived in Utah, we actually had the opportunity to like meet for lunch a couple of times as well, which was always fun.
Yep.
So
Yes.
yeah, we've actually known each other for like about 18 years. So time flies.
It's
And
amazing.
I think both you and Neil actually owe me some royalties for the advertising I did on my Facebook a few years ago for Volume One of Persistence of
Yeah,
Polygamy.
maybe.
For those who
Yeah.
don't know, a photo was taken of me in my library with Volume One of the excellent three-volume series Persistence of Polygamy, and Craig profusely has thanked me since then for the advertising. So that's a joke, but everyone track down your works. But Craig, you've been on the podcast a few times, and people in LDS studies would know you. But how about you give an introduction to yourself? Like, tell us a bit about your background, your education, your work, and also what got you interested in researching LDS history in general, and then we can discuss the particulars
Okay.
about your masters and whatever you want to discuss.
Sounds good. Okay, so yes, I had I earned a master, I earned a bachelor's in history from BYU, and then a master's in history from BYU, and this is what the book is based on with that. And then I earned a master's in library and information sciences again from BYU, and I got a job working at the Family History Library, now Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. And I spent my career there. I was there for a little over 30 years at the library and working with Family Search. And then I retired. Since that time, I still volunteer 1 day a week at the library, and I also spend a fair amount of time doing research on church history. And I got interested in church history, well, really in my very early teens. In fact, probably before, but it was my early teens that I began reading what I could get. And of course, back then in the dark ages, it wasn't easy to get too much. So whenever we would make trips to Utah, because I grew up in the Central Valley in California, whenever we would make trips to Utah, I would try to buy books and stuff to take back with me to read. And so that's kind of where I got interested in history. So by the time I went on my mission, I was really pretty well, fairly well versed, I'll say, on the at least the basics of Mormon history. In other words, I knew Joseph Smith had had plural wives ever before ever going on my mission and things like that. So I at least knew the basics. And I also was aware of the basics of anti-Mormon literature because I was a sophomore or junior, I think a uh, junior in high school. And a very concerned girl in one of my classes brought a pamphlet. I still remember the author and title. It was Three Reasons Why Not to Be a Mormon or Why Not to Become a Mormon by J. Jacobson, whose claim to fame was that he had been a priest in the LDS church. And I read the pamphlet in one night. I mean, it wasn't that long of a pamphlet. Took it to school the next day, and I said to the girl, I gave it back to her. I now wish that I had kept it, but oh well. I gave it back to her, and I said, well, thank you. I said, I want you to know I'm not too impressed with his credentials. And she goes, why not? And I said, well, you notice where it says that he was a priest? Yes. I looked at her and I said, I'm a priest in the LDS church. Her eyes got big. She goes, you're a priest? And I said, yeah, believe me, it's not that impressive to put on your resume that you're a priest. But anyway,
But
so
but
that's
but what if you're the great granddaughter of Brigham Young, like Sandra Tanner? That means you're infallible, right?
exactly. That's like, geez, all of a sudden I forgot the name of the author. It's on the tip of my tongue. He wrote Trouble Enough. I think that was the name of the book. And it was basically an anti-Mormon book. And his claim, his credentials, was that he was a fifth cousin to Joseph Smith.
Ernest Taves.
Taves, exactly. Yes, thank you. I knew it was on the tip of my tongue, but yes, that was his claim to fame. And boy, did I have a good laugh because when you get to fifth cousins, there are millions of fifth cousins. So there you go.
Anyway, back to your interest in the LDS history.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, that really got off on a tangent there. A
No,
squirrel, and there I went. But so that's
I'm to blame as well.
so that's my background. I have been interested in history. I was interested before my mission. I continue to be interested on my mission, and then when I returned and actually went to school because I between graduating and going on my mission, I worked. So when I actually did get into BYU, then I pursued history with the emphasis being Mormon history, where I could do that. But along the line, I did quite a bit on social history. And when I explain about how I picked the topic of anti-Mormon pamphleteering, I'll explain a little bit more there. I think given your background and where you live, you might have a good chuckle on what I was originally going to write about until my professor shot that down in just flames. but we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, and of course, like you've published like a number of articles and books.
I have.
So do you want to give like an overview, like say some books and
Yes.
some articles that would be like a representative of what you've written on both LDS and non-LDS?
Yes. So I most of my articles have been LDS oriented in one way or another. However, not all of them have been. There have been a few really kind of outliers there, including, believe it or not, um, a an essay that I co-wrote with my wife that was in a book, and a presentation I gave and was published. Both of those were on Harry Potter, because our whole family enjoyed reading Harry Potter, and so my wife and I, we would chuckle every time we would read about how Rowling, bless her heart, she's a fantastic author, but she does not understand genealogy and descendancy and all of that type of stuff, where she said that there was only one surviving descendant, Voldemort, of Salazar Slytherin, who had lived 1,000 years before. Because if you descend from someone who lived 1,000 years before, there's going to be more than one of you that descend from him. So we wrote essays about that. So that's kind of really out there, a tangent. But most of what I've written has been Mormon history of some type or another. And of that, I have focused in recent years, uh, almost to the point of ridiculous, on polygamy. But that's because people keep asking me to write about polygamy. But I do find the
But we
topic
all know
interesting.
Joseph was a monogamist and DNC 132 is a fraud. So that
That's right. That's
I'm
right.
joking, people.
I have also written about the so-called Mormon culture of violence, and in the process, I have written about violence that doesn't involve Mormon related violence. So I have an article that appeared in the Journal of the Old West several years ago, titled "The Wrath of a Wronged Woman: Ways 19th Century Women Punished Wrongdoers." And it was all about extra legal justice, or vengeance. And it was a lot of fun to write. And I am working on one right now about being ridden on a rail. Um, but I've been working on that for several years because I keep getting onto other projects. But I hope to get that done in the next year and get it published, because it's going to be a fun one. And then I've also written I've had articles that have come from the research that I did for my master's thesis, and I'll name those in a couple of minutes when we talk more about that. But that kind of covers it. I've just various interests have popped up. John Sharp, who was a Scottish convert and then became a bishop in Utah. I've written several articles about him. He's one of my wife's ancestors, and he had a lot to do with railroading. And so I have written about the railroads and Sharp, and just weird topics like that. Um, that kind of covers it. The books that I've written, most of them cover either politics or polygamy.
Yeah, such as the Mormon quest for the presidency with Neil
Yes,
Brinhurst. In fact, I think
yes,
you're affectionately known as the odd couple of Mormon studies.
we are. We are indeed.
Yeah, and also, of course, like just on the violence, like you've written a very good article that came out. Like it's been a while now, but situating the destruction of the novel expositor in the print culture of the time, because that keeps
Yes,
coming up. As like even if you disagree with the decision, it was it wasn't in the vacuum. It was like a very common cultural thing to do at the
it
time, at least to situate
really
what happened.
was
So
at that time. I mean, hindsight is always better than foresight, and we
yeah,
can look at it and go, "Wow, that was a really stupid decision they made." But um, that's easy for us in our nice soft armchairs to say that. We weren't there at the moment, and nor did we do we understand that that was much more common than we realize, and so they had precedent to go on with the destruction of the press because it was declared a public nuisance. They at least made it legal, as opposed to, in fact, even Ford had commented to John Taylor, if he had just got a mob to go and get rid of the press, then it wouldn't have been the problem that it was. It was the fact that they tried to make it a legal thing, which is just ironic when you think about it. But there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's very easy to engage in, like, say, the historical equivalent of, like, say, Monday morning quarterbacking, or whatever the term is. I'm
Right.
not a sports
Yeah.
guy, but yeah. But no, so that kind of goes on to, like, say, the topic of today's discussion, at least like the master's thesis that would eventually be published as a book on anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain. So, how did this book came about? Because you mentioned, like, say, your MA supervisor who has done a lot of good work. So maybe if you want to, like, say, plug some of his material, because
Yes.
he reminds me, like, say, he has done a lot of work, but especially with the next generation, if you will, they're unintentionally ignoring or, like, skipping over some of his work. I kind of like
Right.
I liken it to, like, say, in Book of Mormon studies, where a lot of people are now, like, skipping over, like, say, some of the work of, say, John Tretnes, who passed away about a decade ago.
Right.
You know,
Which they
and
can't do. He
you
was
couldn't.
amazing. Yeah.
So
That's a good
maybe if you want,
example there. Yeah.
yeah. So maybe if you want to, like, say, give a background, like, say, who your supervisor was, his importance, and some of his publication history as well, and then
Right.
also why this particular topic, because it's kind of an
Okay.
unusual topic for, like, someone in raised in California, also going to BYU, to actually write on anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain in the
Yes.
19th century. So
Yes.
I'm sure
Okay.
there's a story behind that as well.
There is a story. So, first of all, I when I went back, well, didn't go back. I turned around and started work on my master's. I wanted to. I enjoy Western history very much, but I also have a great interest in the British Isles, particularly Ireland and Scotland, and so I wanted to do something more along that line. So I made the British history, and I'm saying British history that would include, and I don't want to offend the Irish, uh, in the general term. When I say British history, I'm also including Ireland. Um, but you could say Irish and British history if you wanted.
To be fair, I'll give you a pass because, one, you do like all things Irish. I think you said your daughters took Irish dancing lessons, so that's one thing.
Oh
And
yes,
two,
yes.
uh, we were being oppressed by the English at the time anyway, so it's okay. I'll give you a pass.
Horridly oppressed.
Right.
But to study Irish history, unfortunately, you have to study British history if you're really going to understand, um, you know, just one miserable act after another against the Irish. So there you go. But so anyway, my emphasis was British history. My immediate professor, the one that supervised my studies, was actually Malcolm Thorpe, was his name, and he was a very good scholar and published a number of articles and a couple of books. But Mac Thorpe, as he went by, he went by Mac Thorpe, and uh, he was an interesting one to get to know, and I actually liked him and continue to like him very much. But he was also a hard one to really get on the good side of. and and I remember fairly early on in my studies, and he was very English oriented, not Scottish, not definitely not Irish. He was very English oriented. And I made it very clear to him that I really had great interest in Ireland and in Scotland. Um, so I went to him, and this was fairly early on. And I went to him and I said, I want to do my thesis on an Irish topic, and I am thinking specifically of looking at the social background of the Earls of Ormond and their influence on the families around them, the other noble families, blah 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 blah. And he looked at me and he goes, I hate the nobility and the royalty, and I don't like Ireland. You're not doing your thesis on that. Pick another topic. And I walked out of that meeting going, well, huh, okay. So I went to my job because I had a part-time job there working in the archives. And the one that I worked directly under, who I consider to be a mentor, was David J. Whitaker. And David J. Whitaker um, is a very impressive historian. He did a lot of really good work. He's up there in years now. I haven't heard that he's passed away, but I know that he isn't in the best health. But he's up there in years. But he just was an excellent scholar. And I went into his office before I started working, and I said, "Hi, David." I said, "Well, I just came from my meeting with Mac Thorpe," and I told him what how the meeting had gone, and David looked at me and he goes, "Well, you really like Mormon history?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." I said, "I just figured I needed to pick something really English or Irish or something, for my master's thesis." And he said, "Well, I did my dissertation on early Mormon pamphleteering." And I said, "Yes," which I'm going to put a plug in for anyone who listens to this. If you have not read David Whitaker's his work, you really should. And one of those is his early Mormon pamphleteering. It is excellent. I cannot hear you.
I'm sorry, I just shared the link to the Kindle edition on the chat, but he also
Oh,
co-authored the book Men on the Mission, which is on the Quorum of the 12 and their early England mission, which is an excellent book as well.
absolutely. It is excellent. And I'm going to throw in an article that he wrote. He wrote A Bone in the Throat. And it's about the public announcement of plural marriage, and it was really really good. So plus a number of other articles. He's a very good historian. But anyway, he said, I wrote early Mormon pamphleteering. I said yes. He said, in the process of my research, I found that there were a lot of anti-Mormon pamphlets that were published in the British Isles. He said, so I would recommend that for your thesis, you do the flip side of what I did. Instead of early Mormon pamphleteering, you write about early anti-Mormon pamphleteering in the British Isles. And I immediately loved the topic. I said, that's a great idea. And so I went back to Dr. Thorpe, and I told him the topic, and he kind of gave a little smile because he and David actually were good friends. And he said, "You got that idea from David Whitaker, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, I did. I give him the credit." And so that's how I got onto the topic. But now that back then, yeah, we are spoiled today with the
By the way,
internet. Yeah.
what year would this be? Just situated.
Okay. So I started I started my master's work in the fall of 1986, and yeah, I don't want to know how old you were. You probably weren't even
I
born.
wasn't born.
Gosh. Oh boy. Okay. I started in the fall of 1986, and I already knew that or found out very shortly after, right around that period yeah, of the fall, that I was going to go over in 1987 over to England to the Mormon History Association conference. My proposal had been accepted to present at MHA there in Oxford, at Oxford University, and so I knew that I'd be going over. And as we talked, I realized, okay, I need to spend some time, either before or after the conference or both, doing research. It was the fall of 1986 was a very important time for me because I got into the master's program. I selected the topic for my thesis and started planning, to go and do research. And I got married, all in the fall of 1986. So before we even got married, I had explained to Suzanne, to my wife, that, well, we're going to have to spend some time there in the British Isles doing research, and which we did in 1987. So, so I did preliminary research before going. I looked at what was available at Brigham Young University, and I talked with the man who was considered to be the most knowledgeable person living at that time. And I don't think it was an exaggeration. I really do think he probably was the most knowledgeable person living at that time on anything printed dealing with the church, pro, anti, neutral, and that was Chad Flake, and he was over the special collections there at BYU, and he published several times. He published his bibliography of printed works, and and then would update it after a few years or so.
Yeah,
And
I believe a version is actually on the BYU website these days. So
oh, I wouldn't be surprised. His work was amazing for the time, and
yeah, because like I know this may seem really obvious, but like it has to be said. This is pre-internet.
yes,
Even like say doing LDS studies, even like say in Salt Lake City, it would not be as easy as it would be today because you can't exactly just Google it. You would have to go physically to the library or physically to the CHL, and like
yes,
trying to find stuff as well. That would be like arduous as well. So there's a lot
and
of
that's
labor
what I
going on no
did.
matter where you are. Yeah.
I went to the BYU, to the Lee Library there at BYU, the Marriott Library at the U of U, University of Utah, and to the Church History Library. And I did as much preliminary research as I could. And I also kind of mapped out where I was going to go, what repositories I was going to visit in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Wales, I depended upon Dennis. Oh, my heavens. Oh, I'm embarrassed. I cannot remember.
I think of Ronald Dennis.
Yes, Ronald Dennis. Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew it was Dennis in there.
Yeah,
I depended on
for
him.
those you're wondering, yeah, just for those wondering, Ronald Dennis, I think he's still alive. He's
I think
translated
he
like
is.
loads of Welsh works, like
Yes.
all the issues of Science trumpet from like 1849 to 1857, which was Dan Jones's journals. So a lot of really interesting stuff. But yeah,
He's
Ronald
an
Dennis.
amazing scholar and has done some incredible work in Welsh Mormon history. So I talked with him. I depended upon his work for this. So I really focused on England, Scotland, and then went over to Ireland. But I contacted the various repositories, made preparations to go, and then we went and altogether, we spent 2 months, I should say, a month and 3 weeks there in the British Isles, and 1 week visiting my old mission field in France and Belgium. I figured if I'm that close, I better go back to there. But anyway, so I went to the various repositories. I spent a week going to the British Library every day and working. I had a favorite spot. It was only later that I found out that it was 2 seats from where Karl Marx used to always sit. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, at least I wasn't sitting in the seat. But but anyway, I had some wonderful experiences doing research over there. And the fun thing was that by the time I got home, and I had made photocopies of various pamphlets and had written down a lot of information, I was really thrilled when I showed Chad Flake what I had, and he was excited because I added more, 3 or 4 or 5 new pamphlets to the library. No, more than that, to the library, but to his bibliography. He had not been aware of them and added them. They were added to the church history collection also. So it was a time well spent, I think.
Cool. So that's kind of the background to the research. So, like, what can you actually tell us about, like, say, anti-Mormon pamphleteering in this period of Great Britain? And by the way, like, I have it linked to the book it's based on in the show notes, so definitely do check it out if you have the opportunity to. Yeah, there you go. Where else would you get advertisement like this?
That's right.
I should tell Greg Kofford to throw me some dough just for this. But
Exactly.
I've also
Well,
had Brian Garner on and Blake Oster. Come on, Greg. But joking aside, it's like we often joke, like say the quality of anti-Mormonism these days, for the most part, is like well, frankly, piss poor. So what was it like in Great Britain during this time? Like, were there like good criticisms of the church? How prevalent was the Spalding theory? When polygamy was announced, like how prevalent was that? If you want to give like the lay of the land, like say some notable
Yes.
figures, I'll let you
Yes.
just do that.
I will do that. So the very first pamphlet that we are aware of, at least that was mentioned, and then also was that we're able to have a copy of, was Richard Livesey's pamphlet, and that was fairly early on. And Livesey based most of what he said actually on Eber D. Howe's book, and so David Whitaker had shown in his dissertation how various published works in one place influenced the published works in other places. And so, for example, the British Empire, it just a sec. Okay. Okay. The pamphleteering followed the routes of the British Empire. And you could say that anti-Mormon pamphleteering got its influence from the early anti-Mormon works in the United States. So E.D. Howe, others like that. Campbell, not as much, but he was listed or mentioned also, but mostly Howe, and then later Increase in Maria Van Dusen, which in reality was Increase. Maria didn't do the writing; it was Increase Van Dusen. But the so you'll get the run of the mill regurgitated stuff in some of the early pamphlets, and you get sensationalism, especially in the later pamphlets after plural marriage had been announced. Then it got it got wild and just ridiculous. There was one author. Well, there were two authors. William Jarman, who was just immediately post the time period that I was looking at, but I still made reference to because it was just so ridiculous. And then John Benjamin Franklin. He talked. His pamphlets went a lot into the temple ceremony and into polygamy, and he went on about how men who went through the temple ceremony, if they had a beautiful wife, that one of the leaders, like Brigham Young, or would decide, I want her as a wife, and they would make eunuchs of the real husband there in the temple. So I mean, you get ridiculous stuff like that kind of reminds us a little bit of some of the garbage we see today. But then you would get some really, I think, some fairly well written anti-Mormon literature, such as, and I'm going to double check here really quickly, and I'm not finding him. I should have written his name down. I keep wanting to say Wainwright, but I think that was his middle name. That's why I'm not finding him. But he wrote. Oh, I'll go to materialism. I think it was he, if I remember correctly, and Orson Pratt had a debate back and forth in print about materialism and immaterialism, and it was actually a lot of fun to read. I really enjoyed it, and
I just Googled. It seems to be a T.W.P. Taylor.
That's it, Taylor.
Yeah. No, we were discussing just before the episode dropped.
Wainwright. Why I remember his middle name and not his surname.
It's fine. But no, that was pretty, like, comparatively speaking, especially even like now, that's pretty a highbrow topic that was
Yeah,
discussed. So
yeah.
you have to give him credit for credit he's due. I do believe that.
And there were a few other Bose, if I remember correctly. He had some pretty good stuff also. And then there was, of course, Henry Caswell. Um, and Henry Caswell, he was such a fascinating guy. He's the one that claimed to have visited Nauvoo and to have spent 3 days in and around Nauvoo, and to have had a meeting with Joseph Smith, and in which he showed Joseph Smith an ancient Greek psalter, and Joseph Smith claimed that those words are hieroglyphics. Joseph Smith comes off looking as a really stupid, rather ugly, uneducated con man. And Edward Caswell as this brilliant defender of the faith who has shown Joseph Smith to be a fraud. The problem was that this was in 1843 in Nauvoo, yeah, 43 if I remember correctly, and he his description of Joseph Smith is not accurate in any way
Yeah,
whatsoever.
I'm
So
not
I
sure if you I'm not sure if you ever watched The Simpsons, but like reading Caswell's description of him reminds me of Cletus, the
yes,
from The Simpsons.
actually, that's a very good description. Yeah.
By the way,
Uh,
our mutual friend Stephen Smoot helped research and write the Mormon article in the Greek Psalter, and I shared it in the show notes for people who want more
Excellent.
in it. But yeah,
Wonderful. And so I ended up after I finished my thesis and had graduated, I ended up writing an article, Henry Caswell, Anti-Mormon Extraordinaire, that was published in BYU Studies, volume 35 in 1996, because Caswell had a fascinating and really, to be honest, a rather sad life. He and his wife they had a number of children, and they lost almost every single child while they were still young, very young. He spent years in America trying to build up the American church, which was just basically the Episcopal Church or Church of England. And
of course, this was
eventually,
back when Episcopalians believed in God.
yes. um, and he eventually returned and was a prebend at Salisbury, if I remember correctly. But the interesting thing, one of his last works, he gives this incredibly impassioned plea to the Anglicans, to members of the Church of England. Don't don't leave your mother church. Stay with the truth. And it's really quite impassioned. And part of that was because a brother of his, Edward Caswell, had left the English church, the Church of England. He was a professor at Oxford, and he was one of the Oxford perverts, which he was not a pervert. He was actually a very good man. That's what they were called because they had left the Church of England and had been
Yeah,
converted to
yeah.
Catholicism.
Their correct name was the Oxford Tractarian movement, of
Oh,
course.
yeah, yeah, but
Yeah,
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 I
but
should
that,
say
of course, it would be known as the Oxford perverts because of that.
yes, yes.
This was when like Anglicanism took itself seriously and they weren't ecumenical or itchy squishy.
Right.
It's just, I know it's a bit of an aside, but like some of the best works against Roman Catholicism, like intellectually speaking, were produced by the Anglicans in this time period and shortly after. I mean, it's 1912, like, but one of the best works against the papacy ever is Denny's book from 1912. And of course, you have George Salmon. I think he's a bit overrated, but he did write a good book critiquing infallibility that was proclaimed in 1870 in his lectures from 1888. So, the Anglicans, including Caswell at this time, were like, they were very educated in terms of the Bible and patristics, because Anglicans at that time took church history seriously. It wasn't like, say, Jesus came in
Yes.
30, and then and Martin Luther you only know today if you're a Protestant, like Martin Luther King.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Very good explanation there. So Caswell was an interesting guy. I also wrote about Increase Van Dusen, from Temple Mormon to Anti-Mormon, the ambivalent odyssey of Increase Van Dusen, that was in Dialogue, Journal of Mormon Thought, that appeared in fall of 1994, because I found him to be just another fascinating individual, and he did have an influence on some of the literature. So there, some of the main themes that were anti-Mormon themes and that I addressed in my thesis were, Book of Mormon, problems with the Book of Mormon, including the Spalding manuscript that did make its way over there. And so references were made to the Spalding manuscript. Um, but the also nature of God and the Godhead, uh, materialism versus immaterialism, dealing with God, and even Adam God made its way over
Yeah,
and was discussed. And then, of course, Eber D. Howe's claims, and a an argument that became popular after Joseph was dead and after plural marriage had been announced was the immorality of Mormonism, and so they plural marriage, incest, proxy husbands, um, licentious sexuality, and nudity. Um, that went along with the temple ceremony, where they made comparisons to masonry, but enjoyed even more the comparisons or saying what Increase Van Dusen had talked about nudity in the temple. Then, of course, Johnson did, um, um, and in they also talked about they they made references to Brigham Young being the lustful Turk. Now, a little explanation about the lustful Turk. There is, I discussed this in the thesis, which I titled that chapter, which was the last chapter, um, "The Gates of the Mormon Hell Opened," because that was actually the title of a pamphlet, "The Gates of the Mormon Hell Opened." And I discussed anti-Mormon pamphleteering from 1853 to 1860. I just made that as the cutoff date there, but the they they really went into trying to describe what life was like in Mormon harems and stuff like that. And they used Victorian pornographic imagery, because the lustful Turk was actually a an early Victorian pornographic novel. And so I discussed that in the chapter, but I also went beyond what I had in my thesis. And in 1993, in the Journal of Mormon History, I published Victorian Pornographic Imagery in Anti-Mormon Literature. And it is amazing that they used so much of that imagery in some of the later pamphlets in the time period that I studied. But Lustful Turk was one of them. And they describe Brigham Young as the American version of the Lustful Turk.
So not a lot. So not a lot has changed in terms of anti-Mormonism.
Not what? I didn't
No,
hear. Sorry.
oh, sorry. Not a lot has changed in terms of like anti-LDS portrayal of Brigham and stuff like that.
No. It pretty much, you know, that saying, there's nothing new under the sun. There really is nothing new under the sun. In fact, I'm going to mention, again, I mentioned to you already that when Jeremy Runnels' CES letter first came out, it had been out a couple of months maybe, and I thought I'd been hearing buzz about it, and I thought, well, maybe I should read this just so I can be up on what he's talking about and see what's new. And I started reading it. I got in not very far, and I'm going, really? And so then I started just doing spot checks through the book. I'd come to a section, I'd read it, and I'd go to another section and would read. And I got to the end of that, and I thought, this is ridiculous. There's nothing new here. And I thought to myself, this isn't going to be popular. No one's going to fall for this. Oh boy, was I wrong. But there's nothing new, and most of what he covers, even the anti-Mormon pamphlets in Britain were covering a good percentage of what he had covered. So it there is nothing new under the sun. In fact, I gave a presentation in 2003. Shortly, the book came out, and I might add the title of the book. Greg and I were kind of joking about this several years after the book had come out, and he had said, yours was one of the first books I published. I said, yeah, and it was the first book that I published. And he said, I wouldn't have accepted that title if now. And I said, I wouldn't have given you that title now. I said, hey, we both go, yeah, that title is so long. It is just a really long title. Penny Tracts and Polemics, a critical analysis of anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain, 1837 to 1860. That is more than a mouthful, and I would not have given it that title, and Greg certainly would not have allowed me to publish it with that title. But there you go. Yeah, we both learned. But anyway, I gave a presentation at FAIR, at their conference, titled Old Themes and Stereotypes Never Die, The Unchanging Ways of Anti-Mormons. And it's true. It is true. You get the same themes and stereotypes. They will add a little more modern twist to it, maybe, but they're the same old thing. The one thing that we don't get over here, and I don't know if they have it over there in modern days, but back in the time period that I was looking at, there was one theme that became more popular in the kind of the middle years of the 40s, and then all the way to 1860, and those were anti-American themes, of saying to the readers, you don't want to be converted by them and go over there. Why leave good old England, to go first it was to go to that town on the Mississippi, and then later to go out to the barren wastelands of the West. You want to stay in England, rich, good old England, and things like that. And it's really quite humorous. One guy did a travel log, and he named places, and I thought to myself, I don't know where you were, but you certainly were not where you were claiming to be, with his descriptions of
Uh,
America,
yeah,
just making it sound
that
horrible.
reminds me of a certain book on Irish LDS that came out, but we can talk about that afterwards.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So just absolutely. That theme was laughable. I really enjoyed reading the descriptions there. But now I do want to, since it is St. Patrick's Day, and in my family we don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. We celebrate St. Patrick's Month. And so, a few days after Valentine's Day, we turned that Irish music on and listened to it, to the point where by the end of March, we don't want to listen to it for a while after that. I want you to know that, Robert, I have hanging in the house here, because we kind of do a party every year, and we hang the flag, a full size Irish flag up, and it's still hanging because it'll be hanging for at least another week. We let it go for at least a week, after St. Patrick's Day. But anyway, I do want to talk about the Irish connection. So I went, when I was doing my research, I went to Ireland, and we went first to Dublin, and we went to the National Library of Ireland, and I think to the National Archives also, but I know the National Library of Ireland for sure. Um, and um, and I looked at what they had available, and they really did not have a lot available. And I was disappointed to find, I knew that in my preliminary research I had not come upon any Irish name, any person who was publishing. But I thought, well, this is preliminary research. When I get over there and go to the actual, National Library of Ireland, I'll find something. I found I found mostly English pamphlets that had made their way over to Ireland. I think I found one pamphlet that had been republished in Dublin. So I did get a copy of that, but it was basically just lifted from an English anti-Mormon pamphlet. And so I did not find much, and I did not write much about anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Ireland because, at least in my time period, I just really didn't find anything. But I do have a story to tell you, um, about an early missionary to Ireland, who happened to be my great grandfather. Now, my great grandfather was born in 1825 and died in 1905. And most people would say, look, you look old, but you surely can't be that old. To have him be my great grandfather as opposed to like a great-great-grandfather or something. But when you come from the fifth wife, 26th of 30 children, and then from one of the younger children of that child, it ends up being your great-grandfather. So he was born and raised in County Wexford, Ireland. His name was William Butler. And he served eventually 3 missions back to the British Isles. And each time he would go over to Ireland and would do part of his mission in Ireland. But the first time that he went back, he arrived back in Ireland and he went to visit family. So he made his way down to County Wexford, down to the town of Gorey in County Wexford, and out to the farms there of his relatives. His brother was the oldest brother, had the farm, and he was not happy with my great grandfather when he found out that he had become a Mormon, and he there was a little bit of animosity there, but they happily enough were able to reconcile. Basically, they said, "Well, we love each other. We'll ignore the religion part." But my great grandfather decided to go and preach in the town of Gorey. And he later described in his life story that he wrote while serving time in the penitentiary for being a polygamist. He wrote his life story, and he wrote about how a crowd had gathered and they did not appreciate what he was preaching. And basically, they started throwing rocks and stones at him. And he was walking down the road to hopefully get away from them. And they kept following, throwing rocks and stones at him. And he tried to go into one yard, where they had a wall and a gate, and the lady shut the gate on him. He walked a little bit further, and a young boy came running out, grabbed him by the arm, and kind of pulled him into their yard. And they shut the gate, and the boy's father was there with a pitchfork and basically was telling the crowd, if you throw one rock or try to come and open up this gate, I'll stab you with the pitchfork. I'll run you through with it. And held him off, not for too long. And a constable came along and arrested my great grandfather, not the mob. He told them to go away. They did. But then he arrested my great grandfather, and the Earl of Cortown, Stopford was the last name. No idea what his first name was. Can't remember it. But the Earl of Cortown basically came and saw him and said, I forbid you to preach. You cannot preach on any of my lands, nor in the town of Gorey, which was basically, he owned the land all around Gorey. And he said, I know who you are. You can stay at your relatives, but you cannot preach, and I want you gone within a day or so. And to which he basically had to agree. So that was the first visit. But my great grandfather, in his story, claimed that, and I'll trust him. I think he would have felt it. He claimed that while the rocks and stones flew all around him, that he did not feel any stone hit him. Um, and so there you go. That's my missionary story for preaching in Ireland.
Cool. So, yeah, that's kind of a good background. But like, just kind of a question that comes to mind would be, you're probably familiar, like, say on YouTube, there's like tier lists, like, say like the best episode of say Star Trek, like say A list, B list, C, And I
Yeah.
once did like say with Bruce Webster and a couple others, like a real fun episode a few years ago, like doing a tier list like modern anti-Mormons. So if you had to do like a tier list to say the British critics of the church in the 19th century, at least in that time period, like who would you say would be like say an A tier critic, and who would you say would be an F tier critic? Who do you think was like say some of the comparatively speaking like the better ones and why, and who do you think were like the worst ones and why?
Okay. So I would say that probably, even though his story was completely unbelievable, I would put Caswell as kind of an A list because he did get into the doctrines beyond his Salter story. Um, so A, or at least a B to B plus for him. I would put uh, Johnny Davis more in the B category. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while, I'm going through to get some of the names here. I would put uh, John Benjamin Franklin. So I said Johnson, but John Benjamin Franklin. Um, I'm embarrassed to say that the way I remember his name most of the time is because of Benjamin F. Johnson, Benjamin Franklin Johnson, and um, and that is a real slight against Benjamin F. Johnson. So I apologize to his memory because he was a great saint, not a scoundrel like John Benjamin Franklin. But yeah, James Greenloff. He was the one that really went on and on with the wild stories about America. I would put him as an F, right along with John Benjamin Franklin, and then Samuel Hawthorne Wait, actually, and Samuel Haining. I would put them both B, maybe even Hawthorne Wait, maybe even A category because they got more into the differences of the doctrines. If I remember correctly, this is from quite a while ago, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm doing.
Oh no, it's
I've
fine.
been I've been
But
so busy on the other things. I haven't done a lot on these. But Tailder, I would definitely, TWP Tailder, I would definitely put him A. And the So those are some of the ones that really jump out at me.
so
Um,
so so there were actually good, even sometimes a bit like nuts at times, like Caswell, but like still intelligent, informed critics
yeah, there were.
at the
I
time.
mean, Tailder definitely.
What's happened in the last century?
I do not know. In fact, John L. Smith. Do you know who he
You have
was?
missions, yeah.
Yeah, he
I've
was.
heard loads of stories from New Midley and others.
Yes, and he just published garbage, and I wrote John L. Smith a letter one time because, well, actually, we exchanged a few letters, but I wrote him and basically really panned what he had published, and I basically told him that that compared to some of the early anti-Mormon literature, his stuff was just laughable garbage, and that in the that how did I put it? Something along the line of those who will study anti-Mormon literature, that on the great dung heap of anti-Mormon literature, your stuff is so poor that it'll be nothing more than a little fly on the great dung heap of anti-Mormon literature. He wrote me back, and he wasn't impressed with my telling him that. But yeah, the literature today, for the most part, is just disappointing.
Unfortunately, yeah. But kind of shows like we're winning the battle. So so of course, like the book came out in 2002. Of course, the thesis itself was written in the mid 80s. And there's
Yes.
been like so if you were to do like say a new edition, what changes would you make apart from like say the title? Have you come across anything that you would add, to it?
Yes, there are some themes that I probably would go in more detail on, and some I might cut back because while it was fun to write about, like the anti-Mormon stories and bias, I obviously would note it, and would maybe just cite some works in a note, but I wouldn't have gone into the detail because I look at it now and it's kind of boring, But I would focus a little bit more on the on obviously plural marriage was a significant one, but nature of God, I felt that I had done a pretty good job with it, but the with well, quite frankly, with some of the work you've done, you know, I have more to cite now of scholars who have discussed some of these other topics that I will be the first to admit I'm not good at. I was talking with them because on Tuesdays I volunteer still at the library, and so I was talking with one of my co-volunteers who was born and raised in London. And so I was talking with her about the topic and everything. And and I was telling her a little bit about you. And I said, yeah, the guy's a brain. I said, he gets into long discussions on sola scriptura and other things like that. And she goes, her eyes kind of went wide, and I said, "Yeah, I said that's beyond me." And so to be honest, yeah, I would rework some of the themes and add material that I either A wasn't aware of, or B has come out since that time, that I think would really help the reader with a more broader picture and placing it within context.
Sure.
And I would even add more with the plural marriage and stuff, based on the research that I did afterward for the Victorian pornographic imagery article, but also since that time, just on the origins of plural marriage and the early years of plural marriage and what was being said. And I would look to see if more themes that I wasn't aware of that were showing up in like American newspapers if they were working their way into the British pamphlets, because it's back to David J. Whitaker, who I think, like I said, I give him all the credit for my picking this topic. And I'm so grateful he suggested it, because I've had some wonderful time researching and writing on it in different articles and things. But he was the one that really pushed the argument. And of course, I discussed it, but I think I could discuss it to a much deeper level now, of the influence of the printed word, the influence on American publications, on British publications, both pro and anti Mormon, and then the dissemination of that material throughout the British Empire, because it traveled throughout the British Empire. I focused on the British Isles, but you get this same literature, not only Mormon but anti-Mormon, showing up around the world as it traveled through the British Empire. So I would probably go into a much deeper discussion on that also in the book, because I think that it has made more of an impact than David really wrote on that a good amount, but I think more could and should be written on that.
Yeah, because I know, like we were talking about, like Ronald Dennis. You know, it was after your dissertation that he translated from Welsh, which by any
Yeah.
standard is a crazy difficult language. And I know Hebrew, so that kind of says a lot. But but like you have, like, say, the multi-volume Zion's Trumpet series, and like a lot of the other works that have been translated as well. And from my reading of that, like it's always polygamy, it's always Spalding theory, and sometimes, of course, like, say, Trinitarian issues and baptism
Mhm.
issues are very common in Wales as well.
Yes.
So, you know,
Yes.
but in, like, say, the number of years since, like, the thesis and the book, have you come across, like, any particular any tract or any other work, from that time period that kind of caught your fancy and you thought, like, was a rare gem, or you know
No, not from that time period.
okay,
I've because it was pretty thorough. I mean, I know there's stuff out there, but
sure.
nothing that I have become aware of that I've thought, oh my gosh, I really missed a real gem there.
So in terms of bibliography, it's not dated. It still holds up pretty well.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Plus, I beefed up the bibliography for the published book from what I had, because there had been a couple of things, and those I incorporated into this. But since that time, I have not been aware. The So I think generally the book actually still has value, um, which at our party we got onto it for some reason. I can't remember why, but it's now on sale for a very low price at Amazon. I think you can get a hardback for like $10, so something like that, at $9.95 or something, was what a friend was saying. He looked it up. I said, I think it's available on Amazon. I don't know. And he looked it up and he said, oh yeah, it's there. And he gave the price and he said, and I think that's for a hardback. So yeah,
good
don't know.
value.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good overview of the book. And I said, like, a link to the Greg Kofford listing is on the show notes, but it's also available on Amazon, as Craig just said. But are you working on any other project related to, like, LDS studies or just history in general that you would like to share? Any other plans or projects in the works in the future?
I am working on a couple of projects, and uh, uh, you know, some, like I've mentioned, the one which has nothing to do with Mormonism at all, but being more culture of violence, American culture of violence, with being ridden on a rail. I am also working on an essay for a book for some people on the Apostolic United Brethren,
Cool.
who are a fundamentalist group. And I am working. I'm working on an essay for FAIR that we'll see how it goes. It once again addresses Joseph Smith marrying teens. So I can't get away from that. So marriage age, basically. Yeah.
Is the essay on the AUB, is that like a collection, like say, on fundamentalism or just like polygamy in general? Is there anything you can
Um,
share about the book or?
no, actually, the one with the essay that I'm doing, they said vaguely it's going to be on this. Do you have anything for this time period? And I came back with, well, it doesn't seem to ever be going away, so I'm going to try one more time to for those who say like I read a thing literally just last week. It was in a Facebook group where a guy said, I'm a genealogist. I've been a genealogist for years, and I can count on one hand the 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 women girls. He said the girls who I found who married at age 14 and 15, and I thought, on one hand, really? So I am going to be addressing that again.
Yeah, and that just reminds me because I forgot. You also co-authored with Marion T. Watson, "American Polygamy: A History of Fundamentalist
Yes,
Mormon Faith." She's an insider, you're an outsider, friendly outsider
yes.
to the issue. But I just shared because on Amazon the Kindle is $2.99, and that is an absolute steal because it's an excellent book. So everyone get a copy. Prefer
Yeah.
if like me you
Wow.
prefer print, go ahead. But $2.99 on Kindle. So
Yeah, that is an excellent deal there. So yeah, yeah, but yeah, so that's what I'm working on. I'm trying to remember when they want to do, and then it'll take forever probably. They may read it and say, "What, you don't have anything new?" I'm hoping, I'm trying to find some new things, but because I have addressed that before. I addressed it in the first volume of Persistence of Polygamy, and we even had a counter. We had an essay and a counter essay. Todd Compton, who I consider a good friend, um, he gave the counter essay saying, yeah, but Joseph Smith was from New England, and grew up in New York, and they didn't have early age marriage like that. To which we responded, or whatever. I responded later, well, yeah, that's because that wasn't on the frontier. you know with marriage age, you always have to look at time and place. And to which I had people. It's always funny, especially on the Exmo pages. They try to make it very personal. Um, so yeah, calling me a pervert, saying I didn't know what I was talking about when it came to marriage age. And so I'm doing it again because I figure I want more comments about my weight, my looks, my education, and my lack of knowledge. So so those are the two main things I'm working on right now,
oh,
are marriage
sounds
age
interesting.
and AUB.
Oh no, that sounds interesting. So I look forward to those being published. So yeah, I mean, I think this was a very good overview of your book. Slightly Irish themed because we were under the time of Great Britain at the time. So But
Wow.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was good, and hopefully people will grab your book on this. And also, everyone, 2.99 on Kindle for a book on Mormon fundamentalist polygamy. That's a
Yeah,
steal.
that's
So,
that's an amazing price. And it is we tried to be as neutral as possible in
yeah,
that book.
yeah.
Um,
I actually have a brief review of it on Amazon because you asked me to do it, and
that's
you
right.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, and like one of my degrees is in anthropology, and like there's like the emic etic insider outsider perspective. Like an insider will never be as objective as they can be, but an outsider will never understand, like, say, the what it means to like participate or experience it as a believer or participant full fledged. So
Yeah.
basically, like, that's just nerdy speak for like it was very good from both sides of the coin because Marian is a convinced fundamentalist, you're a convinced Latter Day Saint, but
Yeah.
there's enough mutual respect where you don't. It's not like you're at loggerheads. There's like a very good
Right. Yeah.
exercise.
When we first sat down to write the book, I said to her, I said, you know, I don't believe the Woolies story, of John W. and Lawrence C. Woolley, and their claim to priesthood authority. I said, you know, I don't believe that. She goes, I know, you know, I do believe it. I said, I know. And I said, and I can respect that. And she said, and I can respect yours and your belief. And we just tried to hit it as neutral as possible. And then when it came to, we had talked about all the problems with the FLDS and all the problems with the Kingstons, and we got to the AUB, and I said, we're going to have to discuss some of your more embarrassing moments in your group's history. And she goes, I know. She said, if we don't, then they're going to say this is a biased book. I said, absolutely. Excuse me. So I said to her, I'm going to be the one to write it. You can go through it and add to it if you want, and edit. And her editing, she actually added. She didn't take away anything. But I said to her, I said, I'm doing that because when the time comes that it's published, if anyone in your group is unhappy with you, um, I'm the one taking the blame. And I can talk about this now because he's dead, but the head of their group at the time was incredibly angry. And we actually had a very uncomfortable meeting with him, during which I said, I'm the one that wrote that. So you can't blame Marianne. I'm the one who wrote it. And so that was poor Marianne got a little bit of trouble from him, and then I had a very good friend who I respect quite a bit, and I'm not going to give his name because everyone would know it. Who called me and said, "Craig, I'm worried about you.
I know
Have
who
you
it is, but yeah.
converted?" Yeah, and he goes, "Have you converted?" I go, "No." So I look at that and I think we must have done a good job because I have people on my side going, I'm worried about you. And she had people on her side saying, I am really offended by what you wrote. So there you go.
Oh no, that's perfect. But yeah, as I said, like, thanks again for taking time out of your schedule.
My
And
pleasure. I
hopefully,
talked too long. I'm
oh
sorry.
no, it's perfect. And hopefully we can have you on again in the near future. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully, and for those watching on Saturday, I'll be joined again by Chandler to finish the debate review of the debate he had with the Calvinists. So yeah, stay tuned for that on Saturday. But until then, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Okay, the stream finished. So yeah, I know who was worried you converted.